Hello and welcome to another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in downtown Brevard, North Carolina. And I'm coming to you from my house, and I'm hoping to get started on all of the sock patterns that we're doing as a knit along in June. So I have plans to try to film the beginning of 3 different sock patterns today. The 3 patterns that we're doing are Rose City Rollers. That's this video. It is by Mara Catherine Briner. It is a free pattern on Ravelry, and none of these videos, disclaimer up front, none of these videos are meant to replace the pattern. They're meant to be used in conjunction with the pattern. So please, even if it's a free pattern, please go get the pattern and give the pattern writer their due. I'll put a link in the description for this video for you to go get your own pattern. I'll be referencing different parts of certain patterns. Sometimes the pattern writer does not want me to make a video on a certain part, so that won't be happening. If there's a missing video and you ask me, I might say, pattern writer has a video for that, and they've asked us to use that one instead. So for this one, Rose City Rollers, it is, look, see, it's a cute little ankle down. It's written for 3 different sizes. And without testing your gauge, you might want to dive in on a size and find out if it fits or not. I have finished 1 sock. I am hoping to make a couple different videos. This one is going to be at how to cast on for the top of this and get it onto double point needles, which it's written for, and get going. The next video on this one may or may not happen this week, is about a traditional heel flap and heel turn and gusset that is used in this little, if I can hold it up right, this little triangle looking section right in there. And then a third video for this guy will probably be about the toe. There are 2 different toes, and we'll see what we're able to go over in terms of just getting you set up for that and then following the instructions. So if you're interested in one of the other socks that we have picked for this knit along, which is Mina's Vanilla Sock Recipe or Hermione's Everyday Sock, I will be making those videos separately. They're for different methods of what I call small circumference knitting. This is a self-patterning yarn, so it's going to do the heavy lifting of all this pattern work while I do the heavy lifting of just knitting the sock and following the instructions. So let's get to it. Meant to mention in the introduction, to make the number of videos that these socks will probably take, I probably won't be using my whiteboard very much for these videos. I've used them in a lot of my other videos. The Rose City Rollers, these little anklet socks, which are great because you don't have to knit the whole cuff if you don't want to. You can just do a little roll here. They are written for double point needles. So I'm going to show you, as the pattern is written, how to put them onto the double point needles. I have my set of US number 1 needles, and these usually come in, let me move that off to the side, in sets of 5. And we're going to be using all of these today. I should say, if you want to learn about knitting with double points in general, I have a video that uses whiteboards and explains how this works. But essentially, and I also have these cute little stitch markers called socks marks. Each one of these has a different number of beads on them to help me keep track of my needles. So just to go over very briefly, to take a circle and break it down into straight things, we're going to be dividing up the circle of stitches onto 4 needles that are going to want to roll. Let me see if I can put this under here. Sometimes with double points, you'll put them on 3. For socks, even though 4 can be a little bit more cumbersome, there's more needles hanging, you have top of your sock and bottom of your sock. You're taking a circle and you're making it into a square. And then you'll have this extra one. Now this may look a little bit intimidating But it really is, even though you're going to be dividing your stitches onto 4 needles, you're only going to be dealing with one of these at a time. The other 3 are stitch holders. We'll see that when the plan goes into action. So what we're going to do first is cast on the proper number of stitches and then divide them over the 4 needles, rather than trying to cast them onto all of these needles at once. Let's just cast all of them onto 1 needle, and then we can distribute them. So they recommend a long tail cast on, and she's talking about Old Norwegian. I like German twisted, but any method you can to cast these on. A long tail, basic long tail, or a German twisted cast on. You need enough of this tail to cast on the stitches because you'll be using your tail and the yarn going to the ball. We'll be using 2 strands of yarn. I have a video just on long tail and just on German twisted, but we'll put them all in this video. And if it's hard to see, especially with these teeny tiny needles, check out those other videos. So to measure the proper amount, a classic sock amount is about 64 stitches. This pattern has 3 different sizes, so there's different numbers of cast on depending on the size sock you're making. And your gauge with different needles will affect how loose or tight these socks are, and you may not know until you try them. So to figure out how many I need, I'm going to wrap this around. We could go 10 times. I just did 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then pull it off. This is about how much tail I need for 10 stitches. So if I double it, I have 20, and then 30, and then 40, 50, 60. I'm going to go till about 70, so I have a little bit of tail. I'd rather have too much than too little. You can make a slip knot here, or if you're feeling adventurous, pulling off some slack here, you can just drape your yarn over your needle. Keep it there with your finger if you need to. A slip knot keeps it on the needle a little bit better. But then how I tell everyone to do either German twisted or just long tail. So you grab both of these strands, you take your thumb and your finger, and you're going to stick them between these 2 strands and pull apart. And this is where keeping a finger here helps. So long tail is just going under the front strand on your thumb, over the front strand on your finger, and pulling it back through this loop. You're ducking back under just the front strand, and that's a stitch. German twisted does a really crazy thing you may or may not see with this yarn because it's teeny tiny. You go under everything on the thumb, you come back and catch just this back strand and pull it up. You go around the front strand on your finger just like you did for long tail. And then if you twist your thumb, you got to go back through this out the way you came in. But if you just kick your thumb, you can go under and up, and it's great. That's probably really hard to see. And my trick when I come up and pull this is I'm letting go of what's on my thumb, and I'm ducking under and pulling it back up. You can always reset. Grab everything. Thumb and finger both push into the center. Again, German twisted, we go under everything on the thumb. Come up and catch just this back strand and dip it under. Go around the strand that's on the back of your finger. And then if you bend your thumb, you can just duck under and up. I'm going to do that 1 or 2 more times. But if that is at all challenging, that's just a little bit stretchier of a cast on. Like I said, I have a video on just this with bigger yarn. It might be a lot easier to see. Regular long tail is just come under the front strand on your thumb, over the front strand on your finger, and back through this center. And then let go and tighten up. throwing too many things into one video, I really recommend checking out my other videos where I'm doing this with bigger yarn. I'm going to keep going with my German twisted. Under everything, catch the back strand and pull up over this front strand on my finger and ducking it back under. Once you get used to a German twisted, it kind of flows. It's a wibble wobble that kind of flows. And if you don't get one right, you can kick it back off and reset and try again. Whatever method you would like to do, I recommend a version of a long tail cast on for this. Cast on the appropriate number of stitches, and I'll meet you back here once you do. This is a good time if you're trying to do it along with me. I'm trying to not make this thing be a million years long. So this is a good time to pause the video and cast on your correct number of stitches and then pick up with me back once I finish this up. I'm not totally done here, but I'm going to pause just to say I'm keeping them super jammed up. If I had these stretched out on the one needle, they'd probably fall off. This is only 50. I need 14 more stitches, so I'm keeping them squished on here. All right, I have my 64 on here. So now I'm going to start distributing them amongst my three needles, my three other needles. And she tells you how many to put on each, or divide your 64 by 4. And I'm just going to slip them. I'm actually going to go from the butt end where the tails aren't. I have a considerable amount of tail left over, but I'd rather have too much than too little. But I'm going to slip them purlwise, which means putting your needle in like you're going to purl. If you put it in like you're going to knit, you're going to twist things. So you're just sliding them over. So I'm keeping my fingers on the end here so I don't lose anything, because this is teeny tiny. And I just did that pretty quickly, but that's how many are going to go on one needle. Take your time. I like to use the quote from The Princess Bride, you rush a miracle, man, you get rotten miracles. We don't want to mess that up and have to do it again. But if you do, that's okay. We've just started. So now I'm going to let this needle dangle, and I'm going to start slipping onto it. I'm just going to let him hang there. And honestly, your cast on doesn't need to be super tight to have this happen, where you can just let it dangle and it's going to be okay. But you'll get used to that as you go. So I'm going to go with the one that still has so many on there. And I'm going to slip onto my second one and just leave my first one hanging underneath me. 1, 2, and I'm going to keep going till I have the right number. One of the most important things with double points is, as much as you can, they're going to want to be in your way. You try to ignore them. All right, I've got what I need on my second needle. So I'm going to let him hang. And then now I've got 2 of them just kind of hanging out here. Now I should have 32 left, and I'm going to put half of them onto this third needle. A couple of those almost fell off. I'm really glad my fingers were up here to brace things. And I have 16 left. Other thing I'm doing as I slide these on is I'm putting them in the middle of the needle. I can rearrange things once I'm done. So now I'll take this and put it down for a second. Now I have, it looks like a hot mess, right? I have 16 stitches on 4 different needles. I'm going to tie up my tail just so I don't accidentally knit with it. So I'm going to double it and then double it again. And then I'm going to put a nice little loop. So I hopefully don't knit with it. Now, the pattern, many patterns at this point will want you to join for knitting in the round. So I'm going to do my best. Have patience with yourself here. I'm going to do my best to lay these out, at least start with like a horseshoe type shape. And the tail can hang under, but if possible, I'm going to try to untwist things. I like laying things down on the table because that gives me, hi kitty, that gives me a kind of a flat base to work from, right? Now these, as I knit each needle, I'm going to stick a stitch marker 1 stitch inside to let me know what needle is what. And I don't put it right on the end, hi, because I need you to move, baby. I don't put them right on the end because they're going to fall off. Okay, you need to move. Come on. He's going to get mad at me later for that. I know. I've made sure that this is up and over. Now, if we look at this, I have a horseshoe type shape. It might be with straight edges. When we join for knitting in the round, the most important thing is that the cast on edge is all on the inside of these. It's not twisting around. I have another video that's only on joining to work in the round. So here's what's, go eat your dinner. We want to complete the circle, which is like this. However, we need to take our empty needle and start knitting into the butt end, which is this one over here. We're not knitting back across. We're going to keep going in a circle. This may look incredibly small, but it's not. Trust the pattern. Only if you're a super tight knitter. This that I made came off of this. So what I'm going to do is with my left hand, I'm going to pick up the one with the butt end, the open side that is on the left here, not the one that has the yarn connected to it. And that is what I'm going to start knitting with my right needle. The others of this I can just try to ignore. I'm not picking this way up off the table though, because I don't want these to get twisted. So until I start this, I'm going to keep them down closer to the table. I'm going to get this up so I can knit it and put my needle in there to knit my first stitch. Then I'm going to reach down and grab the yarn that is coming off of this last needle. I'm going to pull it up. Everything's going to feel weird and wobbly, but I'm going to pull it up and wrap it around to knit my first stitch. Whether you're an English style knitter or a continental style knitter, I'm going to try to ignore all these other double points and just knit my first stitch. I want to mark this as needle 1, so I'm taking my stitch marker with my 1 bead on it and I will put it on right now. Now, if you don't want to mark all your needles, that's fine. I recommend marking the first one. You can use your tail as a guide for where the beginning of round is. But sometimes putting a stitch marker on there helps too as you get further away from your tail. Now, I'm going to make sure that this first stitch is nice and snug before I hit my next one. And there's no ribbing on the Rose City rollers. We are just knitting this first needle. So I am just going to work my way across this first needle, knit, 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 doing nothing but knitting, and stick with me. I almost split that, so here we go again. If I can, if these other needles are getting up in my face, I'm going to try to keep the two that are pointing out under my thumbs, and anything in the back, I've got my fingers back here to shove that down. Focus on only the two that you're knitting and try to ignore everything else. It's all clinking on my rings and on each other, and here I am, I'm about to knit my last one. Now, this needle that had all the stitches is free, and my empty one is now in place here. So I want to pivot. This is my new empty needle. Put it down or put it in your hand, whatever you want. I need to pivot. The next needle that goes in my left hand is the next needle we want to knit. So we're going to shift this. I believe it is clockwise. Your yarn will always be connected when you take a break between needles. Your yarn will be connected to the last needle you knit. And you need to keep moving to go in a circle to the next needle. That goes in your left hand. The empty needle goes in your right. I like to get this new left needle set up with all the other needles that are nearby it, under it. So say it was like this. I like to get the other needles underneath. And then for me, I mean, you can get the tension first. For me, it's helpful to put my knitting needle in that first stitch, my empty one, into that first stitch, like I'm going to knit it, and then grab my tension off of the needle I'm trying to ignore that's right underneath me. And I go ahead and knit the first stitch. And I'm going to pull it somewhat snug so I hopefully don't have a big, huge ladder. Sometimes pulling this snug, the ladder actually forms underneath this first stitch. So there's a delicate balance to work on as you're going. But here I'm going to knit across this next needle. Oops, you know what I didn't do? I was going to mark this. I'm tinking. I have a whole video on tinking to explain what I'm doing right here. I am unknitting back to that first stitch. Here is my stitch marker with 2 little beads on it to mark needle 2. And again, I am just going to knit across. If knitting with double points is cumbersome, some people prefer this. You can do this pattern with other forms of small circumference knitting. I will be showing off those different forms of knitting in other videos for other patterns. And at some point when I have a chance, I will try to do a video on, again, just shove these out of your way. I will try to do a video on how to, and there's my cat, adapt a double point pattern for a magic loop or 2 circulars and vice versa and things like that. So we're going to see if I don't have to kick him off and I can just let him be. So the empty needle now has these stitches from needle 2. Here's my empty needle. If you need to, put it down. The yarn's attached to the needle we just finished knitting. If we're looking at it like this, we need to move on to the next needle. So I'm going to get my next needle up on top. I'm going to slide the stitches towards the end of it. The yarn's connected to this one. We're now ignoring this. It's a stitch holder. I am going to put my empty needle into this first stitch, then grab my tension and knit it. Knit that first stitch, keep it snug. Get my stitch marker that has 3 on it and keep knitting, trying to ignore all the other points that are down here. The only 2 I need to focus on are the 2 that are in my hands. The other ones, I'm doing my best to ignore or to shove them out of the way. Ooh, this last one tried to split on me. I've finished knitting this one. I have an empty needle. Here's the next needle that I need to knit. Again, my tail is getting a little wibbly wobbly in there, but I'm gonna move this needle so it's on top and the other needles are hanging underneath. I'm gonna put my empty needle that's in my right hand into the first stitch. Grab my tension and pull all of these needles snug to each other. I'm gonna put my stitch marker with 4. Now my stitch marker with 4 beads hanging off of it wants to really get in the way. I try to keep it on hanging on the side opposite where my yarn's in back. My stitch marker with 4 is hanging in front so it doesn't get stuck. And I'm going to knit this whole needle. Now there's a couple things to keep in mind as we're doing this. This last one, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. I have a little bit of a hot mess here because it twisted. If I can untwist it to see where my last stitch is. Every once in a while, it's a good idea to count your stitches to make sure you haven't done a yarn over that keeps things. Yep. That adds a stitch. I have a little bit of a twist here that I think is going to cause problems later. So this is the one time I can fix it by ducking my needle under and making sure that these stitches don't twist around my needle. Now, don't panic about that. Most times you join in the round, if you don't do something crazy fun to make sure, it's my empty needle that dropped out, that's fine. If you don't do something fun to make sure there isn't a gap there will be a gap, but it won't last forever. So I'm just going to continue with the same method I've been doing. Empty needle goes in my right hand, move on to the next needle to the left from where your yarn is attached. And I'm going to put my empty needle into that first stitch, knit that first stitch, keep it snug, slide my stitch marker over, move that out of the way if you need to with your thumb, and keep going. See, that pulls up, that gap is not really there anymore. Just keep the first stitch of a needle snugged up to all the other needles, and this should go fairly smoothly. Again, try to ignore the other needles that want to be in the way and saying, look at me, look at me, look at me. This next needle, so here's where my yarn is. The next needle to the left. I'm going to get it up on top. Again, all this is going to wibble wobble right at first, especially. Get everything as set up as you can. Empty needle comes over to the right. I like to just do my first stitch, pull it up snug, slide my stitch marker, and keep going. And with this one, you're going to knit as long as they say to knit, unless you want a higher cuff. Again, this is the Rose City Rollers, has a rolled cuff. So you're going to keep going until you have a cuff length that you like. And then we can start with all the fun of the heel. And that is a video for another time. Maybe later today, maybe later this week. Take my empty. I already do it without even thinking. I move from my empty one comes over to my right. I grab the next needle to the left in my left hand and I get ready to go. Once you get some muscle memory on this, it may not be as challenging if you have not done this before. So go ahead and give it a shot. And we'll see you back here in another video for a classic cuff down heel flap. If that tail wants to get in the way, you tell him who's boss. Take your time, have patience with yourself and your knitting. Move stuff out of the way. Your fingers are your friends on this. And just keep going. If a stitch comes off, if you can, I used to say don't scream and yell and don't pull anything. Now I say scream and yell as loud as you want, just don't pull anything. Try to get it back on there before it runs away on you, and you can keep going. There's that spot that was so gappy before. It is far less gappy with our second row complete. It will keep getting better as you go. So thanks for joining me on getting started on the Rose City rollers on double points. I have my little square going now with my extra guy. Remember, if 4 is too much, you can always put it on 3. I recommend having half the stitches on one if it's not too many, and a quarter and a quarter on the other 2, rather than dividing it up like in perfect thirds, because at some point you're going to have to do stuff with half of these stitches for the heel flap. So we'll see you back here when we have a chance to film that. That may or may not be later this week. It may be next week. Thank you so much for watching this. I'm on to start my Mina's vanilla sock recipe next with Judy's magic cast on. That's been a fun one to learn. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to this channel, or at least giving us a thumbs up or a comment. That is a free way to assist our channel and help it grow. If you'd like to support the work that we're doing here at Sundragon, you can become a member here. That's a monthly subscription, but not the same as subscribers. It's a monthly fee to support the work. You can give us a super thanks, which is like a tip. You can join our knit along page over on Facebook. That is free. And all the knit alongs that we're doing are there. The sock knit along is one of about 3 that are going on over there. We keep adding new ones in, and the old ones never really end. There's my cat. You can also support us over on Patreon, where you can subscribe for a monthly rate and get swag after a few months. And I think he got one of my sticky notes stuck to him. As I like to say, may your crafting be filled with joy and confidence. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. So I've made sure that okay. This is a big fat no. Kitty. No.